Johnny Two-Face here, back with another reaction video. This time I'm reacting to the third episode in the series of the Haitian Revolution by Extra History from the channel Extra Credits, and this is called Fire and Freedom. So, from what I remember the first two episodes, you get all the basics of how this country was made from. It was the most, from what I remember, is it was the most successful slave uprising in the world, and it was the most profitable slave colony from the French Empire, and it tells you in the first two episodes, like, you know, the divisions of this slave colony. The big whites, which are like the aristocrats, nobility, and the plantation owners. And then you got the little whites who are like overseers, people. Basically, they manage plantations for the big whites, because the most of the big whites prefer to live in France itself. But because some claim they were worried about casualties, others were they couldn't be bothered to oversee the slaves themselves. It's some of it's rumors, but then you got the free people of color, which was former enslaved, which had some powers, but over time they were restricted on what they could do, even though they weren't enslaved. Like, restricted on where they could live. They couldn't run for office, but they could own their own slaves, even though they were former slaves themselves. And then, of course, you got the bottom tier, which everyone should know was the enslaved. And again, like most European colonies that had slaves in, they were most likely worked to death and then just replaced with new slaves, like most brought from the African continent. So that's just a quick recap of what I remember from the first two episodes. I could be wrong. Feel free to remind me in the comments section below. And it also describes how it all became a powder keg from the start of the uprising, which I think is going to be at the start of this video. So anyway, the link to the original video will be in the description down below. Please go straight to Extra Credits and check out all their historical content, and let's not waste any more time. Let's get into this. And
August 22nd, 1791, North Province, Saint-Dumas. A dog barks, waking the plantation manager. He tells the mutt to quiet down and drifts back to sleep. Minutes later, there's another noise. He rises and goes to the window, where he then sees that his house is surrounded by the plantation slaves, carrying machetes and torches. "Who goes there?" he calls. A voice like thunder answers. "It is dead."
Wow.
Across the north,
I put the subtitles on because there might be some names or like French names that I can't pronounce, or I might misheard, and so the subtitles will be there if you can't hear the video I'm reacting to, so it might help you out as well. So
the cane fields burned so fierce that the smoke could be seen in Le Cap. The revolt had come with such precise timing and explosive force that it stunned the plantation owners and the French authorities. Indeed, it was so well planned that most of the various factions in Saint-Dumas thought that the enslaved couldn't possibly be the ringleaders, and they openly accused each other. White militias attacked and killed several free people of color, who they accused of masterminding the rebellion as revenge for the death of Auger. Plantation owners besieged the royal governor with requests for protection, and ultimately accused him of intentionally letting the rebellion continue. The free people of color often said that it was actually the big whites who'd whipped up the rising as a way to take control of the colony. The irony, of course, was that all of these groups were pro-slavery, and if they had set their differences aside, they may have successfully repressed the uprising. But instead, the plantations burned. Rebel militias moved from plantation to plantation, liberating the enslaved and burning every physical representation of their oppression. Cane fields, coffee plants, mills, and refineries. This also meant violence against the people who had oppressed them, and there were a number of overseers and plantation owners killed in retribution for centuries of oppression. Gangs of women found the plantation overseers who had coerced or assaulted them, beating their tormentors unconscious. But this rebellion was not indiscriminate. Most often, the rebels attacking a plantation had worked there, and it was common for men or women to step in and save an overseer thought to be a fair man, or to smuggle out women and children. In fact, the scene that started this episode comes from a first-hand account of the rebellion. And the reason that overseer lived to tell his story was that one of the rebels, a man who had been enslaved on that very plantation, stepped forward to demand the overseer's safety. Who was that man? Duddy Bookman, who had triggered the rising with his ceremony. Propagandistic descriptions of the rising, sent back to France, claimed that thousands of white men, women, and children were killed in the initial rebellion.
Which is probably highly exaggerated for propaganda purposes, obviously. But that's something you don't hear about often. Like, slaves, like, if they thought their overseer was a fair man, they try and smuggle them out or protect them. So I did not, as I say, because it's a subject I'm not very clued up on, so I might not give much input, but yeah, it's just like you don't hear often. And because I think the Haitian Revolution is not talked about enough, I think more people should be made aware of it. And then, judging from the first two episodes, it's quite an eye opener. So please encourage more people to learn about the Haitian Revolution.
While this image is stuck, it's inaccurate. A commission at the time counted.
I was about to say that the number's about to be exaggerated,
including those killed trying to put down the uprising. The toll on the rebels ran much higher. Most of them were armed with only machetes and agricultural tools. Only 1 in 5 had a firearm, but they did have other advantages.
Bearing in mind, they're also going up against highly trained troops. Not to take anything away from the enslaved, but they're going up against highly trained French troops as well, and this is a kind of warfare they're not familiar with. So
many had been sold into slavery as prisoners of war. Veterans of tribal conflicts who were adept at guerrilla warfare. Their raids, heralded with the blast of a conch shell, became infamous among their enemies. Even professional soldiers marveled at the rebels' bravery in the face of the superior firepower. Due to a belief that the spirits of those killed returned to Africa, they attacked with a relentless courage, literally throwing themselves jamming their arms into barrels and wheel spokes so the guns could not be reloaded or withdrawn. They suffered terrible casualties in pitched battles. 4,000 died in the August Rising alone, roughly 10 for every enemy killed. But they didn't lose morale. They did, however, start losing commanders. Bookman was killed in early November. Infighting claimed others. And as the first set of leaders fell, and factions splintered.
Of course it's an unskippable ad with the most dumbest advert. Sorry about that.
Grew worse. All sides committed massacres. To approach Le Cap, one of the richest cities in the colony, meant passing a wall of heads on stakes, including that of Bookman. But amidst the swelling chaos, new leaders rose. In the western province, near the city of Port-au-Prince, a separate uprising.
Oh yeah, one thing that did say in the first two episodes, not all of this island was a French colony. This was Saint-Domingue. This was the French part of this island, which I believe was called Hispaniola. I might have to relook that. This is a Spanish colony. And I'm not saying that just because of the name, because this was known as Santo Domingo, which was the Spanish colony part of the island. So, and this is the capital, Port-au-Prince.
Was happening among the free people of color. They managed to sign a treaty with many rural plantation owners, recognizing their shared interests as property and slave owners. they dismissed their all-white governments and installed representatives of both groups instead. After all, the National Assembly had made them free citizens with the May 15th decree. They were only good revolutionary patriots following the law. Those big and small whites in Le Cap and Port-au-Prince, they were the counter-revolutionary royalist traitors talking about independence. Except then a messenger came with the news that there had been a change in power, and the National Assembly had changed its mind. The May 15th decree, making a small number of free people of color full citizens, had been repealed. The plantation owners' rebellion had made the assembly gun-shy, worried that they'd upset an economy that was helped propping up French finances. This alliance with the whites was not to last. In November, after a long siege, the army of the free people of color finally entered the provincial capital of Port-au-Prince. Once inside, though, the treaty broke down, as a personal brawl between one of the little whites and a free man of color descended into street fighting that burned 27 square blocks of the city. The alliance was dead. This same thing will happen basically every time the whites and the free people of color try to form an alliance. Everything will be agreed between the plantation-owning big whites and the free people of color, and then the small whites will come along and muck it up. And this is when one of the key figures of the revolution emerged, a free black man named Toussaint Louverture. Louverture's background, including any early involvement in the uprisings, is a bit mysterious.
I have seen that name, but I didn't know how to pronounce it. I'm not very good at pronouncing a lot of French names, and it's not just because I'm from Britain and I'm English, so.
He was born in slavery, but gained freedom long before 1791, staying to help manage the plantation where his family was still enslaved. He was also unusual in that he had no white ancestry, like most free people of color, and owned no property. Perhaps this fact, the sense that he was of two worlds, was why he was chosen to broker peace between the big whites and the black rebels in the northern province. Because you see, by late November...
So, now this is starting to get into, like, a peacemaker, like Toussaint Louverture. I'll probably pronounce that wrong as well. But it kind of depends on how much it will last, and I know people want peace, but you can imagine that it's not gonna. It might last for a while, or it might not last for not very long. But that's just in a northern province.
Peace between the big whites and the black rebels in the northern province. Because you see, by late November, it was a stalemate. The rebel army held much of the countryside, but the whites and government forces controlled the cities. In addition, a commission had just arrived from France with news that the country had a new constitution, one that granted amnesty for actions committed during the initial revolution. Louverture helped the rebel generals create terms, then carried them to the big whites, and get this, here are the terms that the generals of the rebellion offered. The enslaved would return to the plantations, and the generals would get free. Yeah, you heard that right.
Yeah.
The leaders go free,
that
and everyone
really
else
took me by
goes
surprise.
back into slavery.
Wow.
See, here's another major theme to keep your finger on. Over and over again, we'll see the leaders of the Haitian Revolution make decisions that benefit themselves at the expense of the movement. Now it's unclear if the generals could even have gotten their troops to accept these
It kind of rings true that no matter what happens, just people in general, it doesn't matter. It does not matter what colour you are. There are going to be people who are in it for themselves rather than, for the people they claim to represent. But as I said, this is just going into this third episode. It's just scratching the surface. So, and how it's going to probably break down again. All this peace talk. So.
Terms, but we'll never know, because the big whites, once again, completely refused to compromise, rejecting even these terms. The only winner was Louverture, who gained major respect among the generals. In fact, he was soon one of them, a fellow general in the rebellion. And like many of the other generals, both of the rebels and the free people of color, he settled into living in a large house, giving orders in the little jigsaw piece of the north he controlled. And that's when Louverture began showing himself to be an exceptionally able statesman. On the battlefield, he brought an organization and discipline to his forces that was previously missing in the rebel armies. And his political talents, too, were exceptional. He was excellent at striking compromise, bringing opposing sides together, and finding a situation all could live with. While the fighting was at a low ebb and in control of the countryside, the rebels went about creating a black society, with black leaders, courts, and administrations. which is incredible when you think that they had just been enslaved months before. But this was also a society headed by military officers, with peasants farming whatever land they could. To buy land in the Spanish Santo Domingo, the generals often forced people to grow sugar on the old plantations, and, at times, even sold subordinates into slavery. A practice Louverture refused to take part in, because the revolution to this point was about better working conditions and more power, rather than abolitionism. But that would soon change, because a ship was coming. On it were several commissioners from France, carrying a newly signed law granting full civil and political rights to the free people of color in the colonies. Oh, that's right. The government had reversed itself again, going from some free people of color having rights to none to then everyone, all in about 4 months. But the commission also carried orders to crush the white extremist dreams of independence, integrate the local assemblies, and end the slave insurrection. They came with 6,000 soldiers.
Wow.
But they would need more. Because within 6 months of the commission's arrival, other ships would be arriving in Saint-Domingue. Ships from Britain and Spain. France was at war. And the war in Saint-Domingue was going international.
Okay. Oh, and right now.
Is a sandbox MMORPG
Okay, let me just get rid of this.
in which you write your own.
Special thanks to our educational tier patrons Ahmed Ziad Turk, Joseph Blaine, and Dominic.
And that'll do it. This has been another interesting video about the Haitian Revolution. So going back to the original points where, you know, the uprising is like, you know, this is like the powder keg that explodes in the start of rebels with, you know, with, this was, because I'm pretty sure people would understand that this was going to happen at some point, but at when was anybody's guess. And bearing in mind, these were enslaved people, not soldiers, so unfortunately the organization might not have been at its best, and some of them may have been warriors before they were made into slaves, and they were going to get some more modern army of the time with firearms and better disciplined troops. And as I said, I'm not very clued up on these sort of things, but also I like how it tells of you know, them believing that if they die in Saint-Domingue, their spirits return to Africa, which, you know, gives them such a morale boost that they go against the local soldiers with, like, I don't know if I'm using the right words here, like suicidal bravery, and the fact that it talks about, like, you know, the alliance that the free people of colour tried to have with the big whites, only for it to be reversed, but even though they were seen, because France went through a major revolution itself, there were, you know, the free people of colour were just like, you know, revolutionary citizens that were following the law. Then laws change, and now we're seeing like a former enslaved person by Toussaint Louverture, who has part of Saint-Domingue, the northern province. So the former enslaved, now free people of colour, now starting to become more and more professional, more like professional soldiers under Louverture's guidance, and I like how the narrator talks about Louverture's like political talents, his military achievements, and it's basically the start of a proper black society in Saint-Domingue. So anyway, I've rambled on enough. I'll be looking forward to the next episode, because I want to react to the entire series of the Haitian Revolution. So anyway, this has been another interesting video. If you like this reaction, please like, comment and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next